Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to today's Simulation Vendor Showcase webinar. Today we'll be showcasing some of the simulation tools that are available in Australia, in fact internationally, to support aviation training. The webinar will showcase 5 approaches to simulation, and each of the vendors will make a video presentation of around 10 minutes, and then we'll have a few minutes for questions and answers following each presentation. My name is Richard Alder, the General Manager of the National Aerial Firefighting Centre of Australia. I'm very delighted to be your host today. I just wish to start by acknowledging that I'm hosting this event from Melbourne, which is the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. And I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians, in fact, of all the lands on which you all join us from today, it's in Australia and overseas, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are participating in this event. And I pay my respects to elders past and present and emerging, and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters across Australia. Before we head on, just a little bit of housekeeping. I'll introduce our speakers shortly, but please note that today's event will be recorded, and we'll make the recording available after the event. There'll be a link made available on the NAFC website for that. We will be using the Q&A feature, the Zoom Q&A feature, to take questions. So please put your questions in the Q&A box. And please note that the Q&A box is not the chat window. You can use the chat window to send messages to participants, but if you've got questions for the presenters, please put those in the Q&A box. You'll see the link down the bottom of your screen. Just note that you can endorse questions that have already been asked, sort of upvote the questions by clicking the thumbs up button. And I'll certainly do my best to kind of prioritize the questions and put those to the presenters on that sort of basis. Please, having said that, please do use the chat window to share any thoughts or reflections on the presentations. Just a reminder that you'll need to select all panelists and all attendees if you want any of your chat to be seen by all the attendees using the chat box. But again, please use the Q&A box for questions to the presenters. Can I just remind everybody to please be respectful of each other and our other presenters. Obviously, we've got a number of presentations today from people who are commercial providers in the industry. That's just a matter of maintaining a dialogue within the industry, and so that we can assess approaches and potentially provide feedback to the simulation industry about the sorts of approaches that will be useful in aviation and emergency firefighting, fire and emergency aviation. So it's just part of maintaining that dialogue, and it would be clear that NAFC or AFAC aren't endorsing any particular product, and will certainly aim to provide other opportunities to vendors in the future as well. So again, just a reminder to please be respectful of that, and we'll head straight into the presentations. So I'm very pleased to welcome our first presentation, which is from a Canadian-based organisation, and they're presenting from Canada today, and that's Wildfire Training Solutions. So over to Wildfire Training Solutions video. Thank you.
Lorby Wildfire Response is a software development company aimed at creating training software for the global aerial wildfire response market. Our software is highly configurable, allowing for all agencies to train at the highest level of fidelity. When we started Lorby Wildfire Response, we had one goal: a global solution for aerial wildfire response simulation training that would lower costs, improve training, and reduce accidents. We had seen too many failed or outdated simulation training programs, and we knew that sharing costs between agencies and handing off the development responsibility to a private sector company was the way to go. Our objectives were to develop software that is easily configurable to meet the unique needs of the global market. provide and maintain the simulation training knowledge base for the global wildfire community, and as technology develops, identify, test, trial and implement new features and function. Lobby Wildfire Response makes use of Lockheed Martin's simulation training platform called Prepared. Prepared is a visual simulation platform that allows users to create training scenarios across aviation, maritime and ground domains. Prepared engages users in immersive training through realistic environments. Developed by Lockheed Martin for the land, sea and air military training market, you can train anywhere around the globe with ease. Our solution consists of 4 primary software applications: the instructor station, the pilot module, Lobby Comms, and Lobby Classroom. The instructor station is the heart of the simulation training experience. This software allows the user to create and manipulate network wildfire scenarios through an easy-to-use point-and-click type user interface. Scenarios can be developed and saved as part of the complex training curriculum, where they can be manipulated in real time, driving the fire, increasing density, altitude and reducing visibility. Fire spread rates can be infinitely adjusted and saved in a database. AI aircraft can be added to simulate the complex airspace on the wildfire. Custom static and dynamic scenery objects can be added. Multiple monitors with multiple viewpoints can be easily created. Visually track specific aircraft. Pause fire growth at any time, and this is all done while you see your changes appear in real time in the 3D environment. Let's take a look at how this scenario in Tasmania was created using the instructor station. We will have to view the user interface and the 3D environment in 2 separate windows. Normally you would simply view them on 2 monitors. The instructor station uses Google Maps as the canvas for designing your scenarios. It is automatically tied to your location in Prepared. To place fires, scenery objects, etc., it's as simple as selecting the object and then placing it on the map. The 3D environment will instantly populate with the object. We provide a variety of custom scenery objects to help create a realistic fire scenario. This will increase the overall immersion for the trainee and help drive the intent of the scenario. You have the ability to customize the scenery objects available in the menus, so adding your own AI aircraft, for example, is quite easy. To place vehicles that will move around on the landscape, you select the vehicle and draw the path you would like it to follow. An options menu will automatically appear that will allow you to set speed, adjust or fine-tune the track, etc. Saving your scenario in the database allows the user to build a syllabus of pre-configured training missions designed to meet your specific training needs. Adding AI aircraft to a fire is very similar to adding vehicles. You select the aircraft you want to add, create a flight path on the map, and then add external loads, fine-tune the altitudes, flight path, drops, etc. with the options menu. With a bit of practice you will be able to set up aircraft that will work a section of the fire and even reload buckets from a water source. This can really help create a scenario that forces the trainee to work the AI aircraft into the airspace planning. Visual tracking of any aircraft is easily done from the instructor station. Combined with the ability to create multiple viewpoints on the fire, your situational awareness on the incident is excellent. The pilot module is what allows the individual sim stations to connect to the instructor station through an internet connection or a local area network. It also allows aircraft to be configured for the firefighting mission. Whether it's the retardant drop, bomb tank, Bambi bucket, heli torch, smoke generator, drop control panel, siren, etc., it's all configured and saved in the pilot module. We include some optional advanced features such as the ability to feel the weight of the retardant or water on the aircraft, and in particular, when it is dropped. You are often flying near max gross weight in high winds and density altitudes, so we also added the ability to dump the load. You can reload buckets and scuba aircraft at any body of water or use the reload key command. If you are flying a tanker and want to drop half the load at coverage level 6, you simply have to select this on the drop control panel. If you have wind drift set up, you had better factor that into your bomb run, or risk missing your target. Pre-configure as many aircraft as you like and save these configurations. Once configured, Lobby Pilot allows you to connect to a scenario very easily. With multiple aircraft flying on a fire and communicating on a multi-channel radio system, you will be amazed at how realistic the training becomes. Even the close calls become perfectly safe training experiences in a simulation. Almost everything we do on a wildfire has to be communicated on a radio at least once. Accurate, detailed and concise communication is the key to a safe, efficient and successful wildfire mission. Our voice-over internet radio application mimics the multi-channel comms system used during wildfire operations. Our radios and satellite phone function as per the real-world units. For example, if you want to learn how to operate the TFMD-136 tactical radio in use across Canada, you can do so with our software. We have even modeled a generic, line-of-sight, mobile and handheld radio that you might commonly use on wildfires in Australia and New Zealand. Lorby Comms is a completely independent application and needs nothing more than a computer and internet connection to join a scenario. This means role players, dispatchers etc. do not need to be in the same room or even the same country to participate in a training session. Every agency has their own naming convention and channel frequencies. This is why we made the comm server configurable. When you use the radio, the channel names and frequencies will be identical to your real-world operations. Simply configure your comm server with your own frequencies and save it as the default setup. Anyone who joins your session will automatically have their radios populated with the host agency's default frequencies. This makes training across borders a very simple affair. Let's listen to a recording from a live training session. We are of course listening to all of the active channels and it does get busy, but most of you will be quite familiar with this type of traffic on the radio network.
Alpha Lima Kilo, XMP98, fly with the dispatch.
Go for Alpha Lima Kilo.
Alright, I got a detection called in by Baldy Lookout. It's Bravo Yankee 024. Location is 52 degrees, 30 by 116 degrees, 05. No other resources dispatched at this time. How on that?
I copied 52 degrees, 30 by 116 degrees, 05.
Yeah, that's affirmative. Wrap 5, XMD98, fly with the dispatch.
Go for Wrap 5.
Alright, detection message number is Bravo Yankee 024. Location 52 degrees, 30 by 116 degrees, 05. Wrap 1 with Alpha Lima Kilo are on site. It sounds like there's two smoke wildfires. I'm on that.
I copy 52 degrees, 30 by 116 degrees, 05. Wrap 1 with ALK and 2 smokes.
681 for Dove 126.
126, 681, 2 nautical behind you, 299277.
Correct. I'm showing 32 miles back at this time. And give me a call when you're 5 minutes.
Roger, call 5 minutes, 299.
XMD98.
Hey, Alpha Lima Kilo, this is GNS on 4-1.
Yeah, good day, sir. We have you
Showing
visualized into the
8
fire.
miles back,
There's
and
a
good morning
landing
again, any
pad,
plans for us when you get in there?
just sort of this gray.
Yeah, if you guys wouldn't mind
Well
landing by the lake just north of the fire, and maybe getting some hose and pump out, but probably going to wait for the tanker to do a couple drops on it just to cool it down for you guys.
28.
And just confirming that was on Romeo Whiskey Foxtrot 090.
Clear to Bordeaux.
Okay, I copy
Yeah,
all,
that's a firm.
Fox Hotel
we have
Bravo's
ETA
landing
Yeah, we'll be there in 5 minutes.
at a well
so
site,
same ETA is
just,
1120.
East.
Yeah, that's all received, and we've set air to ground as 4-1 as well.
Fox Hotel Bravo, I have you landing.
Copy
Just call prior
4-1
to
aircraft.
Briefings and debriefings are a common part of all wildfire operations, and sim training should be no different. With Lorby Wildfire Response you are able to record the full training session, both the audio and the 3D environment as it happens, and then replay the session in its entirety with Lorby Classroom. You can even isolate specific radio channels in the audio to ensure you hear what was said. With the ability to place markers into the recording in real time you can quickly and easily pinpoint the specific areas you are focusing on for the training. Key training points, like fire updates, run descriptions, checklist items etc. can all be tagged for easy access later on in a debriefing. Being able to give your trainees a copy of their radio work can be very useful for them to listen to after the fact. The lobby classroom interface is very similar in design to the instructor station, but with the tools required to replay a scenario, with the ability to pause, fast forward, rewind, and jump to specific marker locations.
Well, that was great, and I certainly felt like I was there at the fire. No issues about that. So I'm very delighted to introduce Sean Lund, who's the CEO of Wildfire Training Solutions, and Sean's joining us today from Canada. And the good news is, Sean, that the video is so good that at this stage we don't have any specific questions, but a little bit of commentary from people like the CFA in Victoria who are already using Lobby Wildfire Response and very complimentary of it. But maybe just a question from me, Sean. I was quite impressed by the fidelity, even to the point where the paint's flecked off in the seat, which is very realistic, of course. But this is sort of one of the ongoing points of discussion, I guess, about simulation. I mean, we all know the importance of fidelity for pilot training and pilot qualification and so on. But when we're talking about air attacks and so on, just how important is fidelity, or do you find that people drop into the simulation even in sort of lower fidelity situations? You got thoughts on that?
Well, we've been doing this in Canada for probably the last 14 years. And of course, we started when we started 14 years ago, the fidelity wasn't fantastic. But really, I think the key to it is the communications. If you can create a realistic communication scenario where you're talking to different people, and that I think is the key to sim training. The rest of the stuff, what you're seeing out the window, really just gives you something to talk about, if that makes sense.
No, that absolutely makes sense, and I think that's a common theme that we're getting, right through this process of looking at, various approaches. Is that it is very much about the communications, and particularly when we're talking about the specialists who manage, supervise, and support the aviation operations, and the pilots, of course, too. Yep.
Yeah, it's. Sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead, Sean. Yep.
Well, I was just going to say it's a pretty complex environment, and for people to wrap their head around understanding that environment just by talking to pilots, like you have to take what you hear and turn that into a 3D environment in your head to manage airspace control and to keep everyone safe. So, yeah, the communication side of it that's 99% of the job, to be honest.
And Sean, just one technical question that's come up from Peter Hayes, who's very much an industry leader in Australia in this area. He was keen to understand the sort of bandwidth requirements that when you're operating across the sort of networked environment.
We haven't run into any issues. BC Wildfire actually has been running all of their sim training on a 100 megabit switch, where everything's been connected to, and there hasn't been any issue at all. Actually, we just figured it out the other day that the switch wasn't nearly as quick as we thought it would be. So yeah, it's really what we're sending back and forth is very little information. So we've actually have flown with people in Australia from Canada on a satellite uplink, which we didn't know about when we started, that he was on a satellite uplink, but it was fine. So
great. And for those in Australia, I happen to know that was an NBN satellite uplink with all the latency and so on that usually comes with those things, and it worked fine. Yep. So that's great. Thanks very much, Sean. If anybody does have any other questions, do feel free to put them in and we can forward them to Sean to answer offline. But otherwise, conscious of the time, we'll move on to the next presentation. And that presentation is from Flame Systems, which is also based in Victoria in Australia. And please join with me in welcoming Dr. James Mullins, who's the Chief Technology Officer of Flame Systems and will be making a presentation.
Good morning, afternoon, evening all. I'm just going to share my screen, if I may. So thanks very much for the invite, Richard. I guess a little bit of background on Flame is we develop immersive training systems for firefighters and traditionally on the ground. So it's great to see so many familiar names in the attendee list, but also the companies that are presenting today. I don't necessarily see that we have a solution for a training problem in the air, but we have a capability certainly in Australia here to be able to support immersive simulation, and worked with a number of the companies presenting here today. Having said that, I'd like to give you a bit of a background of what we do and some of the sister organisations that we have around us. Flame Systems is a spin out of Deakin University in Geelong, Victoria. Bit of my background, I'm a third generation firefighter myself. I've been in CFA for about 26 years now. And the Flame Systems fire dynamics modelling and immersive simulation technology had well over 10,000 hours of research and development spent on it in Deakin. And we spun out about 3 million 3 years ago and are selling quite well in now 23 countries around the world. A little bit of our vision, I guess, is that we develop and sell immersive learning solutions for training in hazardous situations, and two current products, and one is our Flame Trainer for training firefighters using immersive first-person training technologies, and the others for training fire extinguishers. But we have a roadmap with a number of other technologies, and certainly aviation could be something we can support with third-party integration. Our remit is really about creating immersion by creating the full physicality. So we do full motion simulation, we do scent, we do heat, we do biometric monitoring to understand the physiology of the user and understand the stress level on the user, which I think is important for feedback. And that way we can get some subjective assessment of the individual and understand how they're coping. We do this in three main areas, and that's really where there's a risk to life. There's an economic benefit and obviously environmental impact. We can train with firefighting foams and things that we can't do elsewhere. I won't run through all of this. I've got a couple of videos I'd like to get through, but certainly agility has been a big part of our company this year during COVID. Traditionally, we'd be traveling around to international fire shows around the world and demonstrating. We've actually managed to sort of double in size this year during COVID by sending systems out and doing remote training, which I think really has focused us on the ability to deliver remote training for our end users, as well as allowing them to work with remote instructors. So being able to put instructors in remote training delivery situations and imparting knowledge. And everything we do engages with the instructor. We don't try to replace an instructor. I might flick through this one, but we do all the metrics and we work very closely with organisations like the NFPA and NIST and so forth over in the US to really understand how we train our firefighters and how we can implement virtual immersive learning into the curriculum. But I do have a video here. I'm going to run through this. Hopefully you can see and hear this one okay.
All firefighters face the challenge of feeling prepared, confident and ready to fight the next fire. It is difficult for training organisations to safely recreate the conditions of a real fire for training firefighters. There's now a new, safe way to prepare firefighters for the fire ground. Flame Trainer, a world-first firefighter simulator that uses virtual reality and haptic technology. Flame Trainer immerses firefighters in a real fire scenario where they can feel heat and hose balls, along with realistic sound and vision. You can set up Flame Trainer in around 10 minutes. It comes in 2 suitcases with backpack, self-contained breathing apparatus, hose reel and branch, virtual reality subsystem with computer and interfaces, heat suit, and scenario software. The equipment fully integrates with industry standard firefighter personal protective equipment, realistically simulating all of the firefighter's senses. To enhance training outcomes, Flame Trainer tracks user performance. The instructor can monitor the firefighter's air usage and respiration on the system's tablet and provide live feedback on firefighting techniques. Flame Trainer has over 30 real fire scenarios that mimic real fire behavior, including its movement, smoke, flashovers, and explosions. Flame can develop new firefighting scenarios to meet specialist training needs. You can now train anywhere at any time. Flame Trainer takes the training to your firefighters and can be shipped easily if you have instructors in multiple locations. Flame Systems is based in Geelong, Australia, and was born from 10 years hardware and software development research at Deakin University.
I'm just going to flick straight into another video now that
Finally, a driver
is one of our
simulator
partner
that
companies.
performs like a real vehicle. With haptically enabled controls, realistic visuals, and dynamic motion, the Reconfigurable Driver Simulator, or RDS, allows drivers to train for performance.
The UMS stands for Universal Motion Simulation, and at UMS we design and manufacture reconfigurable high-fidelity driver simulators.
Developed in collaboration with the Australian Army, the RDS offers high-fidelity training and seamless transition from simulation to vehicle.
Across my 20-year career in the Army, I've driven multiple platforms, and I can say with confidence how close to reality the RDS actually is.
The RDS imitates real life with 6 degrees of freedom, a wide motion envelope, and 2 axes of continuous rotation. A rapidly reconfigurable and flexible architecture allows different vehicle cabin types. A range of vehicle faults and performance parameters can be initiated to better reflect different vehicle operations and push performance limits in a safe, controlled environment. The Reconfigurable Driver Simulator from UMS. And
I'm just going to flick through one more, next one, around pilot training. So hopefully you get a bit of a feel for some of those videos, I guess. The UMS is a project that I've been working on for about 15 years now around this full immersion. And while I'm talking about Flame Trainer, it's about full immersion. It's about being able to put people underneath a neutral plane, seeing what happens if they do the wrong thing and allowing people to make mistakes. The UMS system, what you saw there as a ground vehicle, was picked up by Australian, the Australian Army for the Land 400 program, and will be rolled out for a number of different vehicle types. Some of those in the future, or very soon, may be aircraft. And you saw some of the prototype work we were doing. That was nearly a decade ago for the aviation space. We can pull upwards of 6G and fly you fully inverted if you choose to. I'm certainly not suggesting you'd be doing that in the bushfire aviation space, but certainly something that is where this sort of technology will be moving into the future, I guess. I'm just going to flick through, talking about some of our customers around the world. The US Air Force was our first major customer internationally, and they're one of our biggest customers to date. We supply training technologies and immersive training packages to the US Air Force. in bases around the world. We've got the big miners on board now, and certainly a number of the fire services. I guess my interest is in, and I'll flick through, is in immersive training technology and working with agencies to figure out the right solution. We work sort of above and below the line. It might not necessarily be us, but it's certainly something we can assist with, because I guess with our track record of working in the simulation space for 20, 22 years now, I guess, it's something we're very passionate about and something we see as the future. I guess coming back to the trainer itself, I mentioned it before, it's about understanding, putting people in an immersive environment. It's about creating that multi-sensory feedback, and certainly we see motion is certainly something that's extremely valuable, and can certainly lead to an increase in stress level amongst the trainees. We do a lot of modelling in the fire science. We do fire modelling in real time in virtual reality, which means we have to model our fires at 80, 90 times a second, 90 hertz. Probably the really interesting thing we're working on at the moment is around the biometric performance and evaluation, so we can understand the stress level, the intensity that the trainee is learning at, and we can vary the simulation to suit. So the work we're doing on is around the artificial intelligence algorithms to determine the stress level, understand the comfort level, and tailor the training to the individual. So we obviously don't want to stress our entry trainees, but we also want to make sure that our resilience training is there for our observers and so forth that have been working for quite some time. And obviously we tie this in with learning management systems and provide feedback and real-time information to our end users. I spoke before, we're in the virtual reality space. I see a lot of work in the augmented reality space. We've done a lot of work in that space. So that would mean that you could be in your own air platforms, flying with real pilots, overlaying virtual fire, smoke, and water drop effects in your real aircraft. I think that will be hugely valuable into the future. And as I said, our roadmap, our development roadmap goes out to at least 5 years now around this cognitive science, understanding the individual and really tailoring the training to the individual. So that's all I've got for you today. Certainly welcome any questions. I'm going to stop the share now. So we've got a couple of questions there around the biometrics. Where did they pop up?
Thanks, James. Sorry, there's a little bit of a hiccup just unmuting myself there. Look, thanks very much for that presentation. I think that's a great sort of different perspective, I guess, from some of the other perspectives that we've had, and sort of, coming from that perspective of full immersion. I think that 6G fully inverted sounds like a lot of fun, really, but I'm not sure that I'd really want to be at the end of the hydraulic arm. Maybe for the younger ones these days. And yes, there was a question about the biometrics. I'm afraid the question's disappeared off my
I've got it in front of me, Richard,
screen at the moment.
About biometrics, I guess. Yeah, so we're capturing a lot of things. Everything from eye movement. Firefighters often fixate on putting the wet stuff on the hot stuff. So really understanding situational awareness and their dynamic environments and doing dynamic risk assessments, heart rate, galvanic skin response, exactly, EEG, ECG, EMG, respiration. And we're tying all of this together, and we understand that this is something that can be used operationally as well, certainly. We're seeing too many deaths, minor duty deaths, especially in America in training, a lot of cardiac issues. So we're trying to capture all this information in the training environment, in the virtual training environment. We see that moving across into the operational environment as well, so that we can start to trend people over time and understand the risk factors. But certainly happy to chat about that offline if that's of value.
That's great. Thanks, Andrew. And I suppose one of the things that occurs, have you had any experience in sort of using those biometric measures as, for things like aptitude testing? So testing of potential candidates for training?
So certainly, so that's certainly something we've been working with the Air Force with over a number of years, and you know, my background's in the research space of the university, I guess, and really trying to understand early on what makes a good, in this case, it was fighter pilots. You know, we spend usually about $1 million on a trainee pilot in Australia in the Air Force before we find out whether they're going to be successful or not. And the idea was to try and dial that in early so we can understand the aptitude of the individual using this subjective performance measures. And certainly there's a lot of research in the VR AR space now around understanding that by giving people small stress inciters, I guess, by giving people unusual events. And I guess that's what we're training for in the virtual environments is we can create those 1%ers, the jobs that you may never see in your career. And I think that's probably why the Air Forces around the world have picked up our system, because we don't train for, or it's very hard or very expensive to train for aircraft incidents. They're very similar. They're very, you know, the training environments are the same. They're just a gas-fired prop traditionally. And the ability to create other things and create casualties and create that noise and have people, you know, coming up to you and sharing their challenges and working across that multi-agency space means that the virtual, you know, environments that we create and the companies on this call today can create are going to be hugely beneficial. And I think, you know, training doctrines will change and start to adapt to this as we see this kind of technology proliferated.
Fabulous. Thanks very much for sharing your insights today, Andrew. We'd better keep moving along. But again, if anybody does have other questions to put to Andrew, please do include those in the Q&A box, and we can certainly pass them on to Andrew to answer offline as appropriate. So please now join me in introducing the third of our presentations today, and that's from GeoSim Technologies, and that'll start with a video presentation, and then we'll introduce GeoSim after the video.
In 2019 heralded some of the worst bushfires that our beautiful country has experienced in many years. These fires were brought under control by our courageous firefighters both on the ground and in the air. However, this was achieved at a high price. Australia sadly saw a number of ground crew and air crew injured, and unfortunately there were also fatalities, to say nothing of the damage to businesses and residential homes. Good day, my name is Charles Duplessis, Director of GeoSim Technologies, a 100% Australian-owned company who for the last 18 years has been manufacturing helicopter and fixed-wing simulators for both the civil and defence aviation industry. About 4 years ago, we identified a need to develop aircraft simulators for the firefighting aviation industry, which would improve simulated wildfire training using replications of the tools that we used in fighting of actual wildfires, ultimately resulting in the savings of lives and properties. Since then, we have successfully developed an Air Tractor 802, Cessna Grand Caravan 208, Bell 412 EPI, Bell 206, and AS350B3 simulators, which have been well received and sold to various aviation organizations, both locally and abroad. GeoSim has also developed a VR winch simulator trainer, which is currently being used by the Australian Navy for recruitment purposes. It is also pertinent at this stage to mention that GeoSim has recently concluded a contract to supply a Rockwell OV-10 Bronco and a Grumman S2T Tracker simulators to a large California firefighting organization. Key features of these simulation devices include the following, to name but a few: realistic fiberglass cockpits, unique 4-meter dome with a 260-degree field of vision, accurate flight model characteristics, updatable Garmin GPS units, control loading, various failures related to the particular aircraft, Gen 2 fire retardant control systems, realistic startup and shutdown procedures, advanced weather control with multiple wind, cloud, and turbulent layers, ability to monitor and coordinate multiple aircraft for firebombing missions, realistic cockpit instrumentation, state-of-the-art command and control station that allows control of scenarios, aircraft, and fire features. Discussions with various key stakeholders in the market, including QBE Aviation Insurance, Australian and US-based training organizations, and operators of air tractor seats aircraft, highlighted the additional need for the establishment of a firefighting simulation center, and it is from these discussions that Vulcan was born. Vulcan consists of a one-stop shop firefighting training center that is designed to allow communication between air crew and ground crew using our CASA accreditable aviation simulation units via our technosonic communication devices, which have been designed to operate on an internet or intranet basis instead of using emergency bandwidth, thus allowing air operations managers, air attack supervisors, and air observers, as well as ground crews, to communicate with each other much the same as they would in real wildfire situation. GeoSim recognizes that even though the development of the quality simulators and communication devices were vitally important, it was also necessary to emulate realistic fire conditions so that simulated fires would react to variables such as temperature, wind, humidity, and fuel differentials. In addition, it was necessary that the gels, foams, and water dropped on the simulated fires react much the same as they would in real life. GeoSim has successfully developed its own fire emulation program which meets this criteria. GeoSim realized at the close of the devastating fires in 2019 that, to use a phrase, every man and his dog would have a proposed solution, and that it was necessary for GeoSim to prove its commitment to the development of a firefighting simulation center using its own resources. To this end, GeoSim has acquired a 650-meter complex in Waco and is building the first Vulcan firefighting training center. This center will be completed by the end of February 2021 and will consist of an air tractor 802 seat simulator, a Cessna 337 bird dog VR simulator, several helicopter simulators, and a number of other VR mixed reality simulators. That plus a central command and control center, all linked via an intranet system. The aim of the Vulcan Simulation Center is to produce a replicable simulation center that can be deployed quickly and will provide firefighting personnel with the ability to conduct mission rehearsal exercises over and over again without the risk to the lives of those involved or the massive expense using actual aircraft for training. Thank you for your time.
Well, thank you, Charles. And Charles Duplessis has already introduced himself, in effect, in the video. So, but thanks very much for that presentation, Charles. And yeah, again, it's great to have that sort of different perspective on things.
Thank you very much.
Can I just say I'm delighted to see the Cessna 337 in there as well. You know, one of my old favourites, and I hope that you've got the paint flecks, the chipped off paint as well, particularly on the 337. But I probably if I could just put to you the same sort of question put to Sean Lund earlier on, just how important is fidelity? We know it's important for pilot training when we're talking about skills. How important is it for the sort of procedure training for people like air attack officers and so on?
Absolutely. What we're basically looking at with our fidelity of our aircraft, first of all of our aircraft, the simulators that we produce are CASO accreditable. So under FSD2 Cat B, they're used by pilots right throughout the world. We've just currently, as I mentioned, had a contract with a major California firefighting organization. They looked at our fidelity of our systems, but it's not so much to teach the pilots to fly, it's to put them into situations where they can actually practice their failures, their hot starts, their cold starts, whatever the story is. Their PT6 engine is quite expensive to replace. But not only that, what we have with our fire system as such is almost real world situations where the guys can fly in and experience the types of situations that they would on the ground. And the communication obviously is vital, and that's why we've developed the Technisonic system as well. So all of these come together in almost a one-stop shop, whereby we not only have been producing simulators for the last 18 years, but we've seen the need to develop a firefighting ability that is an add-on onto the simulators that we have. Yes.
Thanks very much, Charles. And one question from the audience. You mentioned setting up a sort of centralised sim centre, and
yes.
Everybody, including John Kett from Victoria, is keen to know where.
Okay, we're at present, a little bit of background. We needed to prove our abilities and our concept. We just realized that talking about it just didn't cut it. So what we did is, out of our own resources, we have now developed a center in Wakefield in Queensland, in Brisbane, and it should be finished by 2021, early 2021. And what we're doing is basically emulating what we had as a vision, where we have a simulation center where people can not only practice their communications and actually practice their actual firefighting techniques, but because it's connected via a multiplayer system, we can do that worldwide. So people in Canada, the US, California, whatever it is, they can actually come in on that system from remote locations and actually practice that. So when the guy arrives in, say from Canada, arrives here in Victoria during our firefighting season, he's already familiar with the communications techniques. He's already flown mission rehearsals in areas that the fires are expected to break out.
Fabulous. Thanks very much, Charles. We better keep moving on. But again, if anybody does have questions for Charles, feel free to include them in the Q&A box, and we'll be happy to pass those on. Our next presentation is from Tiger Tail, and welcome Rick Stone, Managing Director of Tiger Tail, to make that presentation.
And thank you very much, everybody, and welcome today to the opportunity to talk to you about our work with XVR and our work in simulation more broadly. It's great to have the opportunity to talk a little bit today about the capabilities of XVR on scene. Many of you may be familiar with the product, and I'm going to, for those of you that aren't, spend a little time giving you some background about the product and how it can be used for aviation training. It's my pleasure also to have online with me from the Netherlands, Chief Training Officer at XVR, and Edwin at 2 o'clock in the morning is enjoying, I'm sure, a rather strong coffee to help with questions later. A little bit of background. On the next slide, please. As the slides come along, there we go. XVR Simulation's now in its 20th year, and it's grown to be a world leader in incident management virtual reality software. So the software and the use of virtual reality is very much around helping people to develop and practice their incident management skills. So primarily cognitive skills and looking at getting those brains working and helping people to really get on top of incident management. Tigertail Australia has been proud to represent XVR in Australia and New Zealand for 10 years, since 2010. The next slide, please. So XVR is used pretty much around the world, more than 300 training organisations in more than 50 countries. And in Australia and New Zealand, we've got 10 organisations or agencies, fire agencies, that are using XVR. And some of those are leaders in using the software anywhere in the world. In particular, we've got great examples in South Australia, in Western Australia, in New Zealand, CFA. So many of the organisations that you are in are using XVR software. Next slide, please. XVR is we'd like to think of it as a whole solution. So you can use the software to create virtual worlds that you can then deploy in different ways depending on what your organization's needs are. So you can use the software for individual one-on-one training, for virtual training remotely. You can use it in a classroom. You can use it in an exercise. Wherever your learning outcomes are based around or depend on some sort of visual stimulus and some sort of interaction with the real world, the XVR software, the virtual reality of the virtual world, can help to engage people. And as we've talked about, different levels of fidelity, you can have the simulation aiding your ability to make decisions. And that's really the key to using the virtual world. The next slide, please. There are a huge range of environments and 3D avatars available in the XVR world, and that provides an incredible versatility and flexibility so that instructors can create a virtual world, and you can see a number of examples there, a virtual world on the land, a virtual world at sea, or a virtual world indeed in the air. It's existing off-the-shelf software, and it's easy for instructors to learn the skills to build scenarios. The important thing about XVR scenarios, as in all training, of course, is that you need to be clear about what it is you're trying to deliver and how you want people, what experience you want people to have. The virtual world is one of the ways in which you can help people to have that experience, and one of the ways in which people can learn different skills, practice those skills, rehearse procedures, reinforce approaches, and to indeed even be used for replicable, valid and reliable assessment processes. Next slide, please. There's a few examples here of different ways using XVR. Starting from the top left and moving around, we've got South Australian Country Fire Authority working with in a classroom setting. We've got UK setting. The aircraft simulation that you can see there is in Portugal, in the National Firefighting Centre in Portugal, and that's a relatively low-tech example. So an ex-aircraft that has been retired from operational use and simply placed in front of 3 screens which allow for the virtual experience of being in the air. The next one down is in the Netherlands, and that's also a bushfire fighting activity, and you'll see examples of the screens that are showing images from the virtual world, which can then be plotted in a map of the real world. And the last one is an aircraft in the imaginary island of Valabra, and you can see there that it's doing a firebombing run. So all of these are examples of using the software in different contexts in one of the many schools and academies and organisations that XCR has used around the world. And next is a little video, which we're going to play, which will give you a couple of minutes of how XCR can be used. So I hope you enjoyed the little short video. You can see there's some examples of just some of the scenario possibilities and building possibilities you can have with XVR. And you can visualize imagery from a drone, from a fixed wing aircraft, from the helicopter, either inside the cockpit, as you can see on the screen now, or as that third party parrot on the shoulder sort of vision. How does XVR contribute to learning in an aviation environment or an aviation context? Well, it's all the flexibility of the program is such that you can use it for whatever your learning outcome is. So if your learning outcome is about controlling and communicating inside a cockpit, then you can build a scenario that will help you to do that. You can use it for building situational awareness. You can use it for all of the things on the screen there now. The software is quite capable of representing essentially whatever the instructor wants to represent. So it's not built on necessarily machine-driven fire progression or fire behavior. The instructor is in control of the fire at all times and can manage what the fire is doing. So it's very dynamic in the sense that it is entirely responsive to what the learners or the participants are doing inside the virtual world. But you can use the program with people on the ground and in the air in the same virtual world, and they can be responding to the same virtual challenges or virtual contexts. You can even share that virtual world with XVR 360, which is a web-based version of the XVR software. You can share that virtual world with literally hundreds of players or participants who are anywhere connected to the internet. So you can have the virtual activity based in Perth and be quite happily participating in that virtual activity in Penrith or anywhere else that you may want to do that. So the next slide, please. So the intent with virtual reality simulation and the intent with XDR is that it's the external world that we're looking at. XDR doesn't pretend to be a flight simulator. It doesn't pretend to be pilot training simulation. It's very much around the air observers and the communication between the pilot and the observers, the communication between the aviation people on the ground who are managing the airspace and who are communicating with the observers, communicating with people in the aircraft. So it's not about learning how to fly the aircraft, but it's learning how to interpret the environment around and outside the aircraft and to work within the aircraft and to work with the various people who are involved in managing the airspace. So it's very much about human factors. It's very much about communication, and it's very much about giving people an opportunity to practice using the terminology and the tools and the real equipment that they would use. So XDR doesn't come with a communication simulator or emulator. We find that most agencies actually prefer to use their own equipment to practice using the real thing as much as possible, and that's part of the system which you create the virtual world and the real world and mix them up together. Having said that, in Singapore there is a VoIP third-party system that is being used in their home team academy, and in France they're certainly integrating the program with Flight Simulator so that you can increase the fidelity as you use the product. So the next slide, please. We'll flick through these ones quite quickly because they're just examples of how the program can be used. I don't need to talk because you can all read. And the next slide. So we're simply going from different contexts for using the virtual reality software. The next slide. Conscious of time, I'm going to rip through this fairly quickly now. One of the things that we do know with aviation training is that you need large areas. That's been traditionally very difficult in virtual reality because of the size and the computing power required. And there's been some really great advances in building new environments and operating those. And XDR has delivered 2 new environments for the CFA recently, which are 100 square kilometres environments. So very big operational environments that help people to do the learning that they need to do. We'll flick over the next one and take questions. And I can see the question from Rory in questions and answer, and the answer is yes, absolutely. Takes about 2 days to become a really capable builder of an XDR scenario. And the scenarios can actually be shared from organisation to organisation, so that you may have a really smart operator who builds a scenario in Country Fire Service in South Australia, and then it can be used by the Country Fire Authority in Victoria, or by the Rural Fire Service in New South Wales, or Fire and Emergency New Zealand, or anybody. So yes, absolutely. Depending on the complexity, it might take you 2 to 10 hours to build a scenario, and then you can use it again and again.
Thanks very much, Rick, and we'll just take the opportunity to welcome Edwin van Snipshoot, who's joining us from the Netherlands. And just to illustrate the truly global nature of this, that previous question from Rory, I would think is probably Rory in New Zealand at the moment. So, and at this stage, I mean, I think everybody is, as you pointed out, Rick, is reasonably well, probably familiar with XVR, given that it's been operating in the Australian context in a lot of organisations for many years in the ground context initially. So that's good. But there is one other question from Adam Shearer. Well, actually, sorry, more a comment, I guess. Just pointing out that because it is quite well embedded in Australia already, there is the AFAC computer simulation network and therefore shared libraries that agencies submit of their scenarios, and they're shared across AFAC agencies now. So that's an important point to make. Thanks, Adam. Yep.
And that's, and I'd like to invite Edwin just to make a quick comment on the international libraries and the XVR community that gives people an opportunity to share some of their scenarios.
Yeah, what we have, of course, due to the fact that we are in, I believe now in 50 countries with all kinds of scenarios, from small starting bushfires to large starting bushfires. And of course, a lot of experience, especially in the Southern Europe. In the past, Southern Europe was the problem area for bushfires, but since the last 5 years, also the north of Europe is a problem. That means fires in Sweden, maybe you have heard from it, couldn't be get under control in more. For you is that normal, for us is it unnormal. For weeks was burning before whole Europe was mobilized to the south, or to the north, as in Germany, where there's a lot of fires on the border. So there is a lot of experience, and there is also a lot of work groups working together and using XVR also by testing some procedures. They do it in Valabra, they do it in Portugal and Sintra, in European projects, and I believe also some of your colleagues in Australia are working together with some European countries. And that scenarios that's easy to send them around the world. So will, of course, we will help, or we will facilitate that via our website, MyXVR. But the most important thing is from training. It doesn't matter if it's on the ground or ground air or only air. The most important is, I think, working together. It doesn't depend on what kind of platform, but working together, learn from each other, and using the learn tool who is capable to do that. And one of the learning tools is XVR, who can help you to realize that learning goal.
Great, thanks, Edwin and Rick. And just could I just confirm that there isn't actually a sort of a fire growth model, if you like, built into XVR? It relies on the instructor and the scenario developer to grow the fire in a realistic fashion. Yeah.
Yeah. What we have done in the past, we did. Because again, what also was shown in the slide from Rick, we're quite open. That means via SDKs we can connect flight simulators or other things. Of course, that needs some development work, but we get feedback from instructors out of French, Valabra, but also out of Portugal from, hey, nice, the fire propagation program, but it's more against us as with us when we do training, because sometimes we want to go fast forward, or sometimes we want to slow down to achieve our learning goals. So we make all kinds of workaround tools to stop the fire propagation program. And nowadays it's the other way around. They already make the fire propagation in their original system and bring that by themselves inside XVR. So that's another way of working. But the effect is on the other end the same, that the fire will either go faster or slower, depending on weather conditions, etc., slope, etc., and vegetation.
That's great. Well, thank you, Rick and Edwin in particular. I think it's very early in the morning in the Netherlands.
Night shift too.
Thank you very much for joining us today. So we'll move on to the next presentation, And I'd like to introduce to you Simon Vecchio, who's the Head of Operations at Virtual Simulation Systems. So thank you, Simon, for sharing some of the work you're doing in this area. And over to you, Simon.
Thanks, Richard, and I believe there's a video. So Greg, if you wouldn't mind pushing play on that video. G'day all, Simon Vecchio from Virtual Simulation Systems. Firstly, I'd like to thank everyone who's on the call, and a special thank you to NAFSI for having VSS here present some of our past experience and also upcoming projects. And hopefully that does assist you throughout your journey in the 12-month study in ascertaining how simulation could benefit aerial firefighting. Just a tad on today's topics. We'll go through every one of those points. 12 minutes is not enough time to get through what we want to. And firstly, we'll talk about an overview of virtual simulation systems itself. We are a manufacturer of systems and subsystems and have been around since 2009. We have delivered over 45 systems around the world, varying in size and scale, and for different applications across law enforcement, military, and emergency services. It's important to note that we are 100% Indigenous owned, and we do use a complete local supply chain. Now, some of our capabilities itself extend from all sorts of simulation, really used as training tools, and that's quite important to us. All of which on the screen have been developed by VSS, either through acquisition or life of type in the support. And we think that's quite important to offer a robust yet holistic view of all types of simulation. There's complete solutions up the top there, all the way through full motion cockpits, simulated weaponry, live hoist trainers, augmented and virtual headsets, and in particular the equipment that encompass those headsets. So what we concentrate is really the buttonology and try and find the right tool to match the right training output. And I think that's something that's quite important. You'll notice down the bottom right there is an in-game image. They're simply all of the plugins that we've built for a range of customers that really do suit their needs within the virtual engine that we'll get into in a second as well. The three items that we concentrate on here is we look at training objectives when we're building out a system or simulator or subsystem for a training outcome. We look at the simulation needs and whether they be procedural or proficiency or whether we're concentrating on individual or collective training, for instance. And then thirdly, we look at the technology and mainly what we're looking at there is the integration of that, whether we augmented, virtual and mixed reality. Now, on mixed reality, this was a project that VSS delivered to the Australian Navy, mainly centred on the landing safety officer who would sit below the ship deck and safely land or oversee the landing of the MRH-90, and that would include the takeoff as well. In this instance, we thought it best to implement green screen technology with the appropriate buttonology. So VSS have designed the complete landing safety officer deck under the ship, and then on top of the ship have a green screen to stimulate the windows to then interact with those virtual entities, and that's what you're seeing here. This was a very procedural based tool, and this was a tool that we had designed specifically for the landing safety officer needs. This video is really about changing the spectrum a little bit, and we're demonstrating the ability to conduct augmented reality. We're taking virtual entities and applying them across real world terrain. Now, in this instance, it's very conducive to a military scenario. However, we're applying it to a joint terminal attack controller scenario. And the JTAC in this instance coordinates a whole bunch of air assets and surface fires to then either conduct ISR or prosecute targets. If we change that to aerial firefighting and we're coordinating a whole bunch of air assets to then negate the repercussions of a fire, really we're using similar tools here, and I thought this might be somewhat of interest to understand the art of the possible in your construct. So in this instance, again, we're overlaying virtual entities across the real world. We're overlaying overlays in some instances, and stimulating realistic effects, not only from blast and guns and all that type of stuff. We're also stimulating fire, water. In this instance, we're out at Newcastle Beach conducting search and rescue operations with unsuspecting passers-by. And again, when we look back at what we need as, from simulation as a training tool, perhaps this may be an option for you to at least think about for very procedural-based elements. In this instance, where we're stimulating some fire in a house. Again, fire isn't really there, but it does stimulate some of those drills. There's just a little bit of the art of the possible. Now, VSS has been working with RFS New South Wales for a number of years now, and quite recently we were given the challenge by RFS to design a system that concentrated on aerial firefighting, with the concentration point of achieving the training objectives to aerial attack supervisors. We took that challenge, worked through some training objectives and requirements, a budget, of course, and then looked at the technology that might suit those needs for both individual, collectives, and then procedural and proficiency-based scenarios. We then stopped on a virtual reality system that offered a low-fidelity cockpit that really didn't concentrate on flying a chopper itself. It concentrated on using a set of proprietary, VSS proprietary HMDs that enabled the participant to view into a virtual world, which is what we're seeing. And within that virtual world, you had the unique ability to then coordinate the scene in some instances, which includes air and ground assets, along with fire and fire propagation, of course, in some simplistic natures. To do that, we chose Titan Vanguard by Titan IM as that simulation tool. It offers us the unique ability to operate anywhere in the globe, which is sometimes important, especially when you're operating with partners, because B, it allows us to integrate with other simulation systems. And if we're integrating with other systems and potentially training with our brethren across the ditch, or potentially in more further parts of the world, we're able to then stimulate the terrain that they might be using, or vice versa. They could stimulate the terrain that we might be using. And we thought that that was quite important, especially because of the experience that VSS has with search and rescue, not only in Australia, but around the world, and that unique ability to train from a decentralized location. A couple of facts. VSS do have some search and rescue helicopter systems throughout Australian Army, Australian Navy, and then also a few civilian organisations around Australia. Unique ability with this software is to then integrate those fairly seamlessly, thus conducting those holistic scenarios where you're not only concentrating on procedural based with individuals here, you're really linking systems together, which is the power of simulation, to then train from each's home station and support each other through what might be some decent exercise training, whether it be mission rehearsal, whether it be planning, whether it be training for proficiency and currency and certification, or whether it might be an after-action review. I'm sure you've been watching the video, and in this instance, we have created a quite nifty tool here to conduct a range of actions from the air attack supervisor. We've created a nifty UI, and in this instance, you're seeing a video from the instructor view, and the instructor is also able to dial the complexity up or down, depending on the participant's actions. We've created the point and click methodology here, so there is no scripting, there is no back end work. It removes the notion of requiring an absolute expert to then operate this system, because we're delivering the power within the SME/instructor's hands to then derive those training requirements. Now in this next little scene here, you'll notice the aircraft is moving relatively slow for a fire retardant attack. Our apologies for the terminology. What we've done in the simulation software is implemented the realistic flight dynamics and attack profiles that truly do stimulate those training objectives, which I'll keep mentioning, is because it is what we're all about, is using simulation to then stimulate those objectives. And in closing, VSS are developing software and hardware to support aerial firefighting. We are delivering a capability to RFS New South Wales in Dubbo this week, concentrating on aerial attack supervising. And we'd like to think that we have enough experience through many industries over the years to be in a position to educate all stakeholders in the types of simulation with the right amount of technology to meet those training objectives. We'd like to thank NAFSI for the time that they afforded us to present this capability. Everyone will note throughout developing these that it is truly just not enough time because it's such a large topic and subject. But we hope to all the stakeholders out there that we've given enough, not only in education, but enough exposure to what is already out there, plus a little bit on the art of the possible. Again, thank you for your time, and I look forward to questions.
Fabulous. Thank you very much, Simon. Again, I think great to see a kind of a different perspective and a different approach. I think the use of highlighting the use of mixed reality there was most interesting to me, and I think also just a good reminder. And I'm sure all our providers obviously are conscious of this, but a really good salutary reminder that simulation's not an end to itself. It's driven by the training needs and part of the training system. It's not an end-to-end solution in itself, but obviously will provide valuable support to that sort of end-to-end training. Now the interesting news is, Simon, even though as you say, it's not very long to sort of present a complex subject, we don't actually have any questions from the audience. So you must have provided enough information to them. But again, I just throw to you that same sort of question, and you did cover it to some degree about the importance of fidelity. Is it if trainees are being fully immersed in a simulation, is fidelity really important?
Again, I'll argue that it's only as important as those training objectives, and immersiveness in this instance is probably the key here. Importance of our system, to which we thank Titan IM and in particular their product Titan Vanguard for really providing the power of that system, which does provide the fidelity we require for all of our applications. But the immersiveness, I think, is what's most important. And I think the first presenter hit the nail on the head with communications being 99% of that immersive nature.
Thanks very much, Simon. Look, still no questions, and that's probably lucky because that's really is all about we have time for today in today's session. So can I just please take the opportunity to thank all our presenters today. We really appreciate the time that you've put in to make up the presentations and to make yourselves available today to answer. It certainly provided us with a lot to think about in terms of the options available, and how we continue to integrate simulation into our training environment. Thank you to all the attendees to today's event. Our events team will be sending you an email with a short survey on the session itself. We'd love you to fill that out if you wouldn't mind. We'll use that information to ensure that our professional development and events programs continue to meet your needs. And we will, be continuing to run more webinars on this topic and other topics from an AFSI perspective as well. So we're very keen to make sure that they are meeting your requirements. It's been my pleasure to host you this afternoon. Can I just put out a special thanks to Greg Taylor, Nicola Lawrence and Zoe Kenyon, who've been labouring behind the scenes here. And also just to make a quick apology to James Mullins, who I called by the wrong name earlier on in the session. Apologies, James. So thank you all. Until next time, stay safe and farewell. Cheers.